Many thanks to Jerb, Jaren, DayZ Podcast, Taggy's Tag West, That One Random, and Great Poncho for making this video possible. A new weapon stat has entered DayZ in patch 1.13 and it aims to completely confuse all of us on how long players should be unconscious for, sometimes making players go unconscious for 50 seconds, other times 2.5 seconds. So in this video we're going to break down what this new stat is, so we can actually have some idea of how long our victims will be sleeping for. To understand this new stat, you need to first understand unconsciousness and how the shock stat itself works, which has changed many times during development, so even if you are a veteran of DayZ, it's good to brush up on this mechanic from time to time. So, the shock stat rests at its maximum value of 100 shock. If you, for example, take 40 shock damage, your shock stat is reduced by 40 and starts to regen at 5 shock per second, but it doesn't start regenerating until 1 second after the shock damage was received, as seen here. The lower your shock stat goes, the bigger this vignette effect around the outside of your screen gets, and if you fall below 25 shock, you go unconscious. While unconscious, instead of regenerating 5 shock per second, you regenerate 1 shock per second instead, and won't regain consciousness until you have 50 shock again. This means the maximum time you can be unconscious in DayZ is 50 seconds because the lowest your shock can be is 0. 1 shock regen per second, 50 shock required to gain consciousness, 50 seconds. The only way to speed up this slow regen of your shock stat while you're unconscious is if somebody is resuscitating you or doing CPR on you, which increases the speed from 1 shock per second to 5 shock per second, greatly speeding up the process, as you can see here from these comparisons. However, the EpiPen doesn't revive players instantly like many players believe, nor does it affect the shock regeneration speed of unconscious players, which I tested on 2 different servers just to be sure. So resuscitation or CPR is the only way to manipulate this 1 shock per second regen speed until the devs released this patch 1.13, which added a new stat that this video is all about, the uncon refill modifier stat. This stat, aptly named by the developers, modifies the refill of unconsciousness and is placed on all ammo types in DayZ with the exception of flare cartridges. When you inflict enough shock damage to make a player go unconscious with one of these ammo types, it will instead regenerate at the speed defined by this stat and not by the standard 1 shock per second I was talking about earlier. For example, the Magnum uses the 357 rounds, which has the uncon refill modifier stat of 5, meaning it will regenerate shock at 5 shock per second when you make a player go unconscious with these rounds, which is very fast. At a maximum, that's 5 seconds of unconsciousness with the Magnum, but if you knock their shock to 0, it will be 10 seconds of unconsciousness as seen here. So technically, it's not just the uncon refill modifier stat on the ammo type that determines an enemy's unconsciousness time, because more powerful weapons in DayZ are going to have a higher chance of getting that shock stat closer to 0 and therefore longer times of unconsciousness. Nonetheless though, it's mostly going to be this stat that determines unconsciousness times, so let's take a closer look at the ammo types that this stat is on. There are 15 ammo types in DayZ with this stat on, split among 4 ammo categories: pistol caliber, intermediate caliber, which is for assault rifles, rifle caliber, which is for sniper rifles, and these shotgun shells, which are obviously for the shotguns. The pistol category uncon refill is 10 shock per second, which means the player will wake up in as little as 2.5 seconds after being shot. The intermediate category is 7.5, so that's 3.34 seconds after being shot. The rifle category is 5 shock per second regen, waking a player up after 5 seconds after being shot. And finally, these shotgun shells have a stat of 2.5 or a minimum of 10 seconds of unconsciousness. Strangely enough, the Magnum for some reason is at 5 shock regen, as you can see here, so it goes into the rifle category when it comes to this new uncon refill stat. I'm not sure if this is intended or not, but the rifle category does contain the Magnum when it comes to this stat. Anyway, what all of this means is the maximum time a player can be unconscious is now 20 seconds, and that's with shotgun shells. So even if you're using the rubber shells, it will be 20 seconds maximum. In the previous patch, it was a maximum of 50 seconds, which is a very big difference. That's 30 seconds less, but this only affects guns. If you use your fists, a screwdriver, a sledgehammer, or any other melee weapon in the game, a player will regen at the standard 1 shock per second I was talking about earlier. This also applies to going unconscious due to being hit by infected, falling from a height, having a fracture and walking, punching with a fracture, being low blood, or triggering a landmine. All of these are 1 shock regen per second. So everything but guns has 1 shock regen per second while unconscious, which means you'll be unconscious for between 25 and 50 seconds with all of these methods, depending on how close your shock stat is to 0. This also applies to the 4 different uncon refill stat numbers in the game, between 2.5 and 5 seconds for the pistol calibers, 3.3 and 6.67 seconds for the intermediate calibers, 5 to 10 seconds for the sniper rifles and the magnum, and 10 to 20 seconds for all of the shotguns. Using tracer rounds doesn't affect these numbers, nor does using armor piercing rounds, nor does using armor on the chest or the head, nor does different body parts, nor does single or double shots from the Blaze or the BK-43, nor does using an EpiPen, morphine or painkillers, and finally, nor does having a splintered or unsplintered fracture. The only 2 factors that matter are the uncon refill stat on the ammo type that was used to make the player go unconscious, and the value their shock stat dropped to. Only these 2 numbers are used to determine unconsciousness time, and for those interested, here is the formula for that. Now, you don't need to remember this formula, but what I would recommend to estimate how long someone will be unconscious for is roughly remember these times of the 4 ammo categories on screen and guess how close you got them to 0 shock. The closer you got them to 0 shock, the longer they'll be unconscious for. So if you made someone go unconscious from a Mosin shot, for example, it's likely they're closer to 0 shock and would take closer to 10 seconds to regain consciousness, compared to someone that you made unconscious with a Magnum, which would take closest to 5 seconds instead. However, the safest way to predict unconsciousness time is to just remember the minimum times for each of the ammo types and correspond those ammo types to certain weapons. To help you with that, I've placed this new stat on the WOBO website on the newly added ammo stat tool, where you can learn more about the other stats of the ammo types too on the ammo info tool which is connected to it, and I'll update these numbers should they change. Another feature of the website, if you didn't know, is all of my tips, videos and quick tips are available on the website advert free and roughly 24 hours earlier than on YouTube, with some of the tips being freely available on the day that I post them. The latest website patch added the stat changelog too, which will display the detailed changes of stats in DayZ from patch to patch, so we'll be able to see all of the minor and major stat changes to weapons, attachments and ammo from now on. Now, going from 50 seconds of unconsciousness time from guns in 1.12 to 20 seconds in 1.13 is a very big change, and now that 1.13 has been released for a while, you probably have a good feel for how this mechanic has changed the game. So below, I would love to get your opinion on the unconsciousness times. Do you think they're too short? Do you think they're too long? Let me know in the comments. Did you even realize? Because your feedback will no doubt affect how this stat changes over time. Thank you very much for watching and have a good day.